Most people go on vacation and sit on a beach. I'm in Guatemala, and I'm here to try and figure out what happened to the Mayan civilization in the Guatemalan jungles. They just disappeared in the 9th century. And more specifically, I'd like to find out what happened to their riches. So I'm going to begin where the trail went cold, and that takes us to the classic Mayan period city of Tikal.
Tikal was one of the largest cities of the Classic period, growing steadily from 200 AD till a sharp decline in the 9th century. During that time, it was home and the seat of power to an enormous list of dynastic rulers and their royal families. This city covers 16 square kilometers and was home to an estimated 100,000 people at its peak. You can find some pretty amazing examples of Mayan script here in Tikal and all of its little hidden chambers. But the most important example of this is something called the Mutal glyph emblem. Now it's important because even though people refer to this place as Tikal, it's not really its name. Tikal is the name that a newspaper basically gave the site once it was discovered in 1848, and the name kind of stuck. The actual name that the natives had for it was Yaks Mutal. And Mutal, that glyph emblem basically is the city's coat of arms. It represents the rulers. And every Mayan site had its own unique glyph emblem. The reason this is important is artifacts bearing that symbol, you can then identify back from where it originated from. It's pretty handy. Treasure hunting tip number 1. But if we want to discuss treasure, then we need to head to the North Acropolis. Up until King Jasa Chon Kawil chose to be buried in a separate temple, beginning a trend towards temple burials, all the royalty of Tikal were buried in the North Acropolis. Excavations into those tombs have found many treasures, such as necklaces, mosaics, and other finely crafted artifacts. With many royal families calling Tikal home, Tikal was rich in resources. But their wealth didn't come from gold. Mayans weren't interested in goldsmithing until much later. No, their most precious material to work in was jade. And excavations into the North Acropolis tombs have shown many examples of amazing jade artifacts. Treasure hunting tip number 2, jade is still very, very valuable, especially on the Chinese market. You know how I mentioned before, the Mutal glyph emblem and that the cities have their own coat of arms? It brings up an interesting point. A while ago on the black market, Mayan items started to turn up, and they were marked with a glyph emblem from a city that scholars hadn't recorded, which can mean only one thing, that unauthorized explorers, or looters if you want to call them, had found the site and were selling items on the black market before the scholars could be there. Now you can say, sure, shame on them. You might think it's like you see in the movies, where somebody comes across some treasure of historical significance and it's fame and fortune for them, but it just doesn't work that way. Nowadays, the governments basically try and take 100% claim to it. So if you don't turn over your findings immediately, you're risking, charges and even prison. And, I think there's something wrong with that because there's a lot of people who take the time to do the research to find these items. For example, Mel Fisher and Viatocha. So let's say there's a Spanish treasure galleon that's a shipwreck off the coast of Florida. And a diver finds it, who does it belong to? The treasures, who gets it? The diver for putting in the time, risk, and effort, or maybe it's the American government because it was found in their coastal waters, or does the Spanish get it, because it's a Spanish ship? Or maybe the treasure should go back to the Central and South American countries that the Spanish stole it from in the first place. See, it's kind of a gray area. So 30 years in court or black market. And I really think until governments change their policy on this, and at least there's some sort of a finder's fee for the people who put in the research and take the risks, I don't think that is ever going to change. Tikal's plazas were surfaced with stucco and angled to collect rainwater and channel it into reservoirs through a series of canals. Tikal wasn't built near any source of fresh water. It depended purely on rainwater, and all of its drinking water came from these rainwater reservoirs. For years, researchers tried to figure out why Tikal was abandoned in the 9th century. There are many theories like famine, sacrifices, war. But more recent research has shown that at that time a meteorological drought took place, which would have dried up the reservoirs really quickly. So let me ask, where would you go if you ran out of fresh drinking water? My theory is the closest body of fresh water that would sustain the population. And that takes us west to Lake Petnitsa. This lake is home to the Spanish colonial island city of Flores. However, in the 9th century, this island city was home to a Mayan settlement, which quickly grew to become the capital of the Itza Mayan kingdom known as Tenochtitlan. Was part of its growth attributed to rich royal refugees from Tikal, trading jade for water and land? No one knows for sure, but what we do know is this island city was the last Mayan city to fall to the Spanish in 1697. I'm standing on the western shore of the island. Now, it's this very spot where the Spanish attacked with 235 soldiers and an oar-powered boat. Now, they took over Tenochtitlan and they founded the Spanish colonial city that they named Our Lady of Remedy in St. Paul, which is known as Flores today.
The thing that has me most interested, though, is the story about the Spanish. It's a story that I've heard before. The Spanish come in, they conquer, steal the natives' treasures, send it back to Spain on a ship. But in many cases, there's a legend associated with the last holdout settlement that ends up getting wise to what the Spanish are doing, taking the remaining treasures and hiding it somewhere even more remote. That's the story behind Paititi, El Dorado, Montezuma's treasure. All of them share that same common storyline. So could it be the same with Tenochtitlan, the island city? It was the last holdout in this area from the Spanish. So did they hide their treasures somewhere more remote? Treasure tip number 3, the number one reason people bury treasure is to hide it during times of war from invaders. Now, it's a sound theory, but if only there was a document or something to, give it a little bit more credit. Except that there is. On a recent trip to England, my research paid off. There I found some documents, a story about an explorer named James Carmichael. Now, James Carmichael set into the Petén jungle in 1868 on an expedition led by a couple local guides. These guides and him came across 5 structures. Now, the legend was, amongst these natives, they told James that it housed the treasures of Tikal. Now, he didn't have the right tools to be able to properly excavate, so he left, head back to England and looked for further backers to fund a second expedition. Eventually, he found a couple Americans who did, and they all went back into the jungle a second time. Now, the Americans got ill and they turned back, but James continued on himself, and he was never heard from again. Now, that jungle is just as dangerous today as it was in James' time. It's still surrounded with malaria, pit viper snakes, and a huge population of jaguars. You'd have to be crazy to go there. But luckily, I found a helicopter pilot, and for the right price, he's willing to take me out to deep into the jungle.
Good morning. This is the helicopter here behind me. The pilot is going to fly me out to El Mirador. That's where we're going to touch down and enter into the jungle. El Mirador is where the trail leads next. It's the Mayan homeland dating back to the 6th century BC of the pre-classic period. It's thought that it's the ancestral home to the royals who lived in Tikal. If you want to hide treasure from the invading Spanish, where better than an ancient abandoned city even deeper into the jungle? Don't worry, the helicopter pilot says he'll come back for me, as long as I don't get eaten by a jaguar or bit by a snake or something. But from here, the rest of the way is on foot. In the distance, you can kind of hear the howler monkeys. I don't know if the mic will pick it up. You can see here, archaeologists have been excavating different areas around El Mirador, likely digging down different layers here so that they can properly date things. Currently, there is no archaeologists out here working. I haven't run into anyone yet, and likely won't. El Mirador is 26 square kilometers, making it even larger than Tikal. In its heyday, it's thought to have had 200,000 Mayans living here, double that of Tikal. Its largest pyramid, La Danta, rises higher than the jungle canopy. It's actually larger than any of the pyramids in Egypt. As you can see, archaeologists have been working out here excavating, but there's a lot left to be excavated. But I didn't come here for El Mirador. I came for a place that's even more remote. Deeper in the jungle, there's a place called the Mirador Basin. Now, the reason this is important is there's a new technology called LiDAR, and basically it's a laser that you hang to a low-flying plane. And that laser can cut through the jungle canopy and give you an accurate 3D map of the jungle floor below. Now, they flew it over top of the Mirador Basin, and guess what they found? 30 uncharted temples, structures that no one has visited before. And that's happened just a few months ago. Those guys even actually published a map online. Thanks, guys. So archaeologists are trying to put together expeditions to get people out there, government funding. But technically, you could walk there from here. Now, is one of James Carmichael's, the 5 structures, is that one of the sites? Who knows? The problem is that area is supposed to be so remote that it's used by drug cartels for drug trafficking, far away from the eyes of the authorities. So forget jaguars. That's the real threat out there. All right, break's over. The basin is just southeast of here, that way. Here we go. A little fox. It's beginning to sink in that if I don't find my way back to that helicopter, I'm as good as dead. But if the mosquitoes have their way, they'll be the death of me, you know, or the humidity. It's a weird thing looking forward, making sure you don't step on a snake, or always looking over your shoulder to make sure a jaguar's not attacking you. I swear to God, if velociraptors come from both sides, you know, that's my tipping point. But there's a good indication that I'm on the right path. If you look here, I'll try and focus it ahead. Oh man, I'm okay, I'm okay. You can see some of the stonework, although it's not super impressive. This is definitely some signs that I'm closer to other Mayan structures. Forget the drug cartels. Do you know what the Guatemalan government would do if they saw me poking around out here without a permit? Can you say Guatemala in jail? Between you and I don't exactly have a permit to be here. According to the LiDAR maps, I'm now finally right in the middle of the Mirador Basin. The structures line up. There's no one here. No authorities, no cartels, no jaguars. Just this amazing structure behind me. Let me ask you. Let's say hypothetically you find yourself in the middle of the Mirador Basin. Structures no one has seen in 2,000 years. Would you video it and give it to the local news, or would you shut the camera off? Stop recording. Keep exploring. Keep what you find. Tell no one and disappear. Honestly, what would you do?